So it's 6 after, and so I think we should get started because we've got an hour and a half to finish all the rest of Buddhism. I think the next time I teach this, I'm going to reorganize it a little bit. Too much of this got pushed to the end this time. This course used to be a 5 2-hour classes, so it's 10 hours, and it got reduced to 4 1.5-hour classes, so it's 6 hours. So I'm still getting used to the more rapid pace of trying to squish everything in a much shorter time. So, so I may go a little fast today, but if I do, please ask questions. The whole purpose of this course is to ask questions and to have that opportunity to ask a lot of questions, because this course is really for you. It's not for me. It's an introductory course, but sometimes advanced people like to take it again also because you sort of go through the whole thing very quickly. And it's very nice to have that sort of overview. And the other purpose is to actually use terminology in this course, because I want to introduce people to the terminology of Buddhism, so that when you hit this terminology in other courses, it makes sense to you. You don't feel lost. You sort of feel like you have a sense of what it means. So part of this purpose is just an introduction, but part of it, I think, is also to try to be broader and more helpful, give you that bigger scope and give you that introduction to the terminology. Okay, so let's officially begin. Oh, wait, sorry, we've got a comment. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. If anybody needs to, this can be late for some people. And if you need to leave, that's fine. You can just drop out. It's no problem. And then you can catch up to what you miss for the rest of it on YouTube. Yeah, sometimes these evening classes are hard for people that are morning people. Okay, so let me officially begin then. So this is Buddhism in a nutshell. And this is the 4th class of 4 parts. So this is the final class for this series. And this series usually gets repeated every month. I don't always teach it every month, but sometimes it's useful to actually take it again from a different person, because everybody gives their own perspective, and that's very useful. So this particular class that I'm teaching now we're at the tail end. So we started out by talking about what Buddhism is all about, what are typical attitudes and thoughts that you encounter in Buddhism. You know, how do Buddhists think? Buddhists think very different, in many ways very differently from other people. As you will maybe see, we have sort of a different perspective on things. And the other thing too that I went through is I went through the life of Buddha. I went through the history of Buddhism, how it spread all the different ways. And I spent quite a whole class basically on the 4 Noble Truths, which are the Buddha's most fundamental teaching, which is the truth of suffering, the truth that there's a cause of suffering, a truth that there's a cessation of suffering, and the truth that there's a method to achieving that cessation of suffering. And so in this class, we're going to continue along. As I was explaining, there's actually one thing that I find very interesting about Buddhism is that it has a very well-defined path that you follow. And this path we describe in the Tibetan tradition as lamrim. Other traditions have their own terminology for it. But basically, there's a specific set of things that you need to achieve. And like I said before, everything in Buddhism is cause and effect. So if you're going to become enlightened, to release yourself from suffering, you have to create the causes to do that, which means that you have to engage in spiritual activity, the types of spiritual activity that lead to enlightenment and liberation. And in Buddhism, it's not just sort of random. It's like everything is well laid out in great detail. And you can take whole courses on the different aspects of the different things that I've been teaching. But anyway, I'm just giving you the overview. Now, the final overview is what we're going to spend a lot of this class on is Mahayana Buddhism, which I have to explain what that is. The original Buddhism that Buddha himself taught roughly 500 BC, so about 2,500 years ago, later on became called the Hinayana Path. Hina means lesser vehicle, and yana is vehicle. The lesser vehicle because people started teaching the Mahayana, the Maha greater Yana vehicle. So they explained that Mahayana was the greater vehicle. And so we'll explain, again, I'm coming to what all this means. But anyway, and then later on, people thought that that was, I don't know, sort of degradatory or not a very nice way of describing it. So nowadays we talk about the main people, the only people left who practice the Hinayana path are called Theravadins in Sri Lanka and places like that, Thailand, down in those places. Almost all Buddhists are Mahayanists in the modern era. So all the Zen, Tibetan, pretty much almost everybody you hit, chances are very high that they're probably Mahayanists. But nonetheless, if we take the original form of Buddhism as Buddha taught it, in the end, Buddha sort of summarized the whole path by saying that there's sort of, what should I call them? There's basically three things that you need to achieve for the path of liberation. He calls it trainings, that's the word I'm looking for. So there's what Buddha talked about. He said that there's three higher trainings. And these three higher trainings, as Buddha talked it, you can give different terms for the translations, but basically, we'll just call it ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And so what ethics means is just basic morality, non-harming, not harming yourself and not harming other people. And the flip side of that is the positivity is benefiting people, yourself and others. So in a nutshell, that's what Buddhist morality boils down to. The next higher training is called concentration, but we can just the same call it meditation, because that's what it really means is meditation, being able to focus your mind. Because as we talked in the earlier classes, the essence of Buddhism is what you do with your mind. All of your pain and suffering, all your experiences are all filtered through your mind. And so the critical thing in Buddhism is what you do with your mind. And meditation is basically your handle on your mind. It's your way of actually directly, if you like, facing your mind and actually seeing what's in it. And through meditation, you can actually change your mind. And you can remove the negativities in your mind, and you can change yourself into a better person. And it's a very, very powerful technique. And the final highest training of all is called wisdom. And in the Buddhist path, it's really wisdom which liberates you from samsara, this world that we live in. So wisdom is what really enables you to remove all of your pain and suffering and achieve what we call enlightenment or nirvana. And again, I'm going to talk about that at the end. A lot of times it's also, in the Mahayana tradition, is also called emptiness teachings. In the original Buddhism, it actually comes under the form of selflessness or non-self. And I'll explain what that happens. So that's my two big topics tonight are really the Mahayana Path and the emptiness teachings, and then a little bit about Tantra or the Vajrayana vehicle, which is actually a form, an interesting aspect of the Mahayana Path, as I will explain. But the way that these three higher training works, and these three higher trainings are also applicable for the Mahayana Path, because in the Mahayana Path too, it is the wisdom, realizing emptiness that liberates you from samsara, that purifies your mind ultimately. But I'll go more into detail about that. But if you're going to achieve this wisdom, you need a powerful mind, because our ordinary types of wisdom in the ordinary world aren't powerful enough to achieve this liberation from samsara, to actually penetrate deeply enough. And it's the power of concentration or meditation, single-pointed concentration, where you have total control over your mind and you can actually focus it wherever you want. And not only focus it, but actually intensely focus it, so it can actually drill down and penetrate to the truth of the reality of how the world works, which is another way of understanding what wisdom means. Okay, but then to achieve meditation, what do you need? You actually need this ethical foundation, because if you're doing all of this negativity, then your mind is disturbed. As we talked about in the earlier class, there's this Sanskrit term klesha, which means afflictions or delusions, which are the cause of all of our negativity. And these are things like greed. The three core ones are greed, hatred, and actually ignorance. And those are the reasons why we do all of the negativity, which creates all of our negative karma, which causes all of our suffering and pain. And so if you're doing all of this negativity, you have disturbed minds. Your mind is never quiet enough to develop the concentration, the single-minded focus that allows you to penetrate reality. So all three of these things work together. And of course, the ethics is important just because of karma all by itself. But here, when we're looking at this broader path, we're looking at the whole way to liberation or enlightenment. And as I said before, people tend to get hung up on this. They seem, it's sort of like enlightenment or bust or something like that. People feel like, if I'm not enlightened tomorrow, I've wasted my life or whatever. Enlightenment is a big goal. And as I said before, the way that I look at Buddhism personally is I look at it as a way of improving my life moment by moment every single day. And I think that's the better way of doing it. If you can train your mind to remove your negativity and improve the positivity of your mind, it makes you happier moment by moment. Your life is better, irrespective of all of the external things that are happening, whether you're poor, rich, whether you have good circumstances, bad circumstances. If you train your mind can be happy under any circumstances whatsoever. And moreover, if you train your mind to produce just good karma, then ultimately in the future, you will have wealth, all the other things that you need to lead a good life. But in particular, as I mentioned also, you need good karma because good karma can ripen as spiritual growth. And as I said, nothing happens for no cause whatsoever. So to advance along the spiritual path, you also need good karma because you need that ripening of the good effects of karma to advance your spiritual life. So that's another good reason for practicing. But as I said before, I think if you just practice on improving your spiritual life in whatever way you can, there's many different ways of doing it. As I say, everybody has their unique path and everybody has what they need to do at this precise moment. So you shouldn't feel like you have to do what everybody else is doing, but you should feel like you should work on the spiritual path, those parts that resonate with you, that you feel are helpful to you, that are making you a better person. And in fact, that's what the Buddha, when he was alive, talked about over and over again. People would ask him, what should I do, what I shouldn't do? And he would always ask, is this a wholesome activity? Is this making you a better person? Or is this an unwholesome activity that's making you a worse person? And once you start looking at it that way, it often becomes obvious what you need to do. So at any rate, it's really important to really focus, not get hung up with enlightenment. If you improve your life day by day, you'll get there. You'll reach enlightenment, guaranteed, and your life will be better moment by moment. And I think that's what all of us need. We need our lives to be better moment by moment. We need to feel happier about ourselves, who we are, how we live in the world. And when we die, we have to feel like we've lived a good life and we're happy. And if you do that, then you will certainly be reborn in a higher realm. You'll be able to continue your spiritual life as long as it takes to achieve enlightenment. You don't have to worry about it. And there's no one special technique that saves you. People are always worried about, if only I could learn this, then I would be enlightened. Enlightenment everything in Buddhism has many causes. In Buddhism, there's never a single cause for anything. And you see that, and it's the same way in our regular world. In our regular world, everything has many causes. And so there's many spiritual activities you need to accomplish to reach enlightenment. But you don't have to worry about it because my experience is, and the Mahayanas would say that it's because the Buddhas are all out there helping us, trying to provide opportunities for us. if you just try to keep doing better, opportunities will arise and you'll just find yourself doing what you need to do. You really don't have to worry about it. So I would not get hung up about needing any special, this teaching or that teaching. You just keep doing what seems to you resonate with and what seems to help you improve your life. And so anyway, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about enlightenment, but I always worry that people will just focus on that. And you shouldn't worry about that. If you focus on your day by day, moment by moment life, enlightenment will take care of itself. And I think what you will find too, it's interesting, the teachers you need, the teachings you need to learn, all of that will come to you if you're making an effort to improve your life. I don't know why that's true, but that's just my experience in Buddhism. So anyway, the longer I am a Buddhist, the more I relax and get about all this. When I was a young Buddhist, I always worried, if I don't do this, my whole life is going to be ruined or whatever. But now I'm more relaxed. See, Aaron, I think you had a question.
So how do we know what practices we should look for?
Well, there are standard practices. Certainly meditation is something that I would recommend for everyone, learning how to meditate, for example. But the early practices, when Buddha taught, most of the time, he talked about ethics or morality, trying to live a good life. And for me, the teachings that I found most helpful were the teachings and actually these kleshas. What are these sort of negative tendencies that we have in our mind? And what are the antidotes toward these negative tendencies? And so for a lot of people, you will work on, you have to look at yourself. You have to look at, again, part of the hallmark of these kleshas, or these delusions or afflictions, depending on how you translate it, is that they disturb your mind. And so it's usually things like hatred, jealousy, if you have a lot of anxiety or worry, if you have negative, if you're very greedy, you have this sort of grasping attitudes, those are the things that are really helpful to work on. And through meditation, you can actually work on it. I mean, if you do mindfulness meditation, for example, it enables you to see clearly in your mind exactly how your mind is functioning. Because normally what happens, as I talked about in the earlier classes, is we all have this problem of egotism, that we tend to look at the world in a very egocentric way, which means that we evaluate everything. Does this thing bring me pleasure? Is this thing distasteful to me? Do I want to push it away? And because of that, it distorts the way we look at the world. Every time we look at the world, we're always evaluating in terms of ourselves. Do we think it's good for me or bad for me? And because of doing that, we don't see the world as it really is, how it really functions. And we also don't see ourselves, how we are and how we really function. And what you can achieve in this sort of mindfulness meditation is to cut through that. And you can actually learn to look at the world in a much more neutral way, where you don't engage this sort of egocentricity. And through doing that, it actually is very helpful. So I guess what I would say is I would just take various teachings. In Zoom, you can take all sorts of things. Just look for things that interest you. And when you find something that resonates with you, just work on that. Because the other thing too, that everything in Buddhism reinforces everything else. So if you learn this one area, it actually helps all of the other areas. And then when you learn the other areas, it actually reinforces what you learned in the other thing. And so what I would do is I would say, just trust yourself. Look for what you find helpful. Because in Buddhism, there's a lot of esoteric teachings, which may be over your head, well beyond you, but sometimes people think that it's really important because, it's so esoteric, it's so deep, if only I could get that. And it's really the simplest thing, the simplest things are actually love and kindness. And like I say, the one practice that I practice every single day, and which to me is actually the simplest Buddhist teaching. And in fact, it's so simple that you might even know that it's Buddhist. You could actually just think of it as just, wonderful thinking, is these things of every time, if you walk down the street, every person you see, just think, may you be happy. And then think, may you not suffer, may you never suffer. And really try to believe that deep within your heart. And do that with every single person you meet. And you can generalize that, may everybody in my town be happy. May they be free from suffering. May everybody, especially, may everybody in the world be happy. May they be free from suffering. And really wish that intensely. And my own personal belief is that, and this is actually called the Buddha called it the Brahma Viharas, the Brahma dwelling places, Brahma meaning the most excellent and perfect. And Buddha said that there's actually two more. There's altruistic joy and equanimity, which would take a little longer to explain. But even just these first two, just wishing people to be happy, wishing people not to suffer, it changes you. It changes you moment by moment. And you'll find that every time you make that wish, it makes you happy. There's something about it that is just very, very nice. And you feel like a better person. And Buddha said that this type of practice accumulates more merit than any other, more positive karma than any other practice. It's the most powerful karma producing thing. So that is one practice that I find very helpful. And I try to do that every day. And I see that it's changing me. It's changing my mind. I become a more caring person. I reduce all of my negativity, any sort of anger. If you're wishing people to be, even your worst, eventually you can build up to even your worst enemy. Wishing, like I even imagine Vladimir Putin, may he be happy, may he be free from suffering. And in particular, when I think about that, I think about all the negative karma that he's producing by all of the things that he's doing and how he's going to suffer in the future. I think that's terrible. I think it's terrible for anyone to suffer. And so I developed a strong wish for him to stop doing all of these things because I do not want him to suffer. And that's the goal in Buddhism. You don't want anybody to suffer. We don't want ourselves to suffer. You don't want anybody to suffer. You want everybody to be happy, but you want everybody to be happy with this sort of pure happiness, ultimately. Spiritual happiness, because that's the only real happiness. As we talked before, sensuality, sensual pleasures, when you look at it more deeply, aren't true happiness. They're unstable. They always change. They're never permanent. They're always ultimately in some way dissatisfactory. And it's only pure spiritual happiness, which is really pure. And in meditation, you can experience some of these forms of spiritual happiness. And so you can check for yourself. You can say, which form is better? Eating a delicious ice cream cone or one of these meditations where I just launch into one of these deep joys. And you can ask yourself which joy is better. I've known some Buddhist monks who said, if they only knew some of these joys and pleasures and some of these higher meditations, they wouldn't care about sex, money, anything. They're nothing compared to these sort of meditational joys. But again, the whole thing in Buddhism is you have to experience it for yourself, And so Buddhism is actually all about practice. It's not believing anything. You don't need to believe anything to be a Buddhist. You just have to trust Buddha enough to try some things and see how they work. And then when you have the experience, it leads you to say, oh, this is great. I think this is wonderful. For me, I find it a joy to study Buddhism. It just makes me happy every time I sit down to study Buddhism. And I can't stop studying Buddhism because it makes me so happy. And that's just my personal experience. And so, but you have to develop your own personal experience. And, as Buddha said, don't believe what I say, go out and try it and see if it really is true. And so I think that's the important. So that's what I would say is go online to these various practices and just see what you think might be, what entrances you, what interests you, and try it out and try practicing and see where it leads. So I think, everybody has their own personal paths. So I think, I can't prescribe what you yourself personally need, but I think you will know what you need when you hit it. So again, I wouldn't worry. and it's not as though if you do this thing, you're missing on this opportunity, or, I think we're sort of led to where we need to go. So I really think you don't have to worry about it. Just, follow your heart and what you think works. So is that okay?
Oh yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I went on too long. Now I won't finish. But that's okay. It's like it's the other thing too. There is this karma, it's like if you finish or don't finish, it doesn't matter. I have this feeling that people will hear what they need to hear. And so I don't worry about it that much. And so if we don't finish, that's okay too. But I will race and try to finish. Just because that's my nature. Okay, so those are the 3 higher trains. So let's go into Bodhichitta now. So Bodhichitta is this Mahayana path. So Buddha lived around 500 BC. As I say, dating wasn't so great then, but it's roughly about 500 BC. And this Mahayana path started developing around 1000 AD. Sorry, around 0 AD, about the time of the birth of Christ. So roughly around 0 AD is when the Mahayana path started developing. And this Mahayana path became very popular. As I say, it became the dominant path of all of the forms when Buddhism spread to Tibet, to China, Korea, Japan, everywhere. It's really the Mahayana that is the form that spread. And in my mind, and in the Mahayana path, there are specifically Mahayana sutras, meaning recordings of what the Buddha said and various teachings he gave. However, these Mahayana sutras didn't appear until 500 years after the Buddha died. So in the Western way of thinking, it seems a little bit questionable. But nonetheless, if you talk to the Buddhists, they say that, the way, if I talk to Geshe Sharab at our center, for example, I think the way he says to think about it as being inspired by the Buddha. And these are very deep, powerful sutras or discourses or teachings. And many people find them extraordinarily deep and just bliss out on these Mahayana sutras. But they did appear roughly 500 years. But in a sense, the way that I see the Mahayana path is that it's really part of the original path. It just adds a certain emphasis, and it adds a very beautiful emphasis, a very extraordinarily beautiful emphasis. And one way of thinking about it is that, as I said before, there's a distinction actually between liberation from samsara, or achieving nirvana, and being a full Buddha. And so, as I said before, liberation from samsara means achieving nirvana, which is escape from this world that we're in into a world of perfect bliss forever, eternal bliss, basically, where you never suffer ever again. However, and that's the goal which Buddha, the historical Buddha who was on the earth, taught, and that's what he advocated. However, even at the time of that Buddha was alive. Oh, wait a second. Sorry, Aaron, you asked a question.
Oh, I was just going to say that Nina has a question.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Yeah, Nina, go ahead. Sorry, I missed that. Sometimes these little hands don't show up well against the backgrounds. Yeah, always feel free to turn on your mic and interrupt me.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you had any rules for.
No, this is a small class. We throw all the rules out the window. So feel free to interrupt at any time.
Thank you, Aaron. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing the mindfulness implementation you do in your day about may you be well, may you not suffer. So I was just thinking earlier today, while I'm trying to work on my spiritual healing and understanding, how can I also cultivate that for others while I'm focusing on me right now? And so you sharing that was really helpful. And like you said, it's so simple and easy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm excited to use that. And then for Aaron, I wanted to say that I found this on Meetup. So I've also searched like Sanghas in my area on Meetup, and it definitely gives you lots of options of classes you can go to see what feels good or right for you. And so I know you said this is your last part of your series. I'm late to
Well, that's okay. As
I'm
I
ex-
said, you can find the earlier stuff on YouTube also. The
Okay.
three earlier classes. Yeah, but thank you for sharing that for Aaron. Yeah, there's so much opportunity now soon. I mean, it's
Thank
amazing
you.
all the stuff out there. So I'm sure you can find something that you will really resonate with. Yeah, and I have also always loved this, happiness and free from suffering teaching. It's like it just struck me. And the thing I love about it is that it's just so simple. And it's something that you can do moment by moment. And as I say, you should really try it out, because what really, I think, it's almost addictive, because it makes you feel so good every time you do it. And it's very perfect. It's very Mahayana also. Exactly what we're talking about now. So anyway, getting back to the Mahayana, what people noticed is that the original Buddha just knew so much more. It's like he had omniscience. He knew everything. Whereas the people, and there were many people who achieved this liberation, or sometimes we call small enlightenment, at the time that Buddha was alive. In fact, all of Buddha's closest associates all achieved liberation from samsara, nirvana. But everybody noticed that Buddha was so much more, a much more powerful spiritual being. And in fact, the Buddha also talked about being a bodhisattva, being in training to be a Buddha. So that's what a bodhisattva is. And so eventually, over time, people developed this idea, we should actually be a higher being. We should actually become like Buddha. We shouldn't just aim only for liberation from samsara. We should have this higher aim to become a full Buddha. And so that's the essence of the Mahayana Path. And the essence of the Mahayana Path is encapsulated in this teaching, which is called Bodhichitta, which literally translates, it means chitta is mind and bodhi is enlightenment. It's literally the mind of enlightenment, if you like, bodhicitta. And this bodhicitta is the special practice of Mahayanas. And it's what makes you a Mahayana. And the definition of it is the wish to achieve full enlightenment, not for yourself, but to help all other sentient beings become fully enlightened. So it's a completely altruistic goal. And the other thing too that comes into bodhicitta is that it's just not about one person. So it's not about wishing your spouse to become fully enlightened. It's not wishing your mother to become fully enlightened. It's not wishing for your best friend to become fully enlightened. Well, it is, but it really has this everyone aspect to it. It's the wish for all sentient beings to become completely happy, fully enlightened. And the reason why you do this, the motivation is you ask yourself, oh, if I'm going to become you ask yourself, well, maybe there's different ways of putting it, but maybe the way is starting from suffering. Because maybe you see your mother suffering, your mother getting older or having some disease or just not feeling good. And so you develop this wish that it's intolerable for your mother to be happy. So you ask yourself, well, how can I help her? Well, as an ordinary human beings, there's not that much we can do. However, deeply spiritual beings have great power to help someone. You can look at someone like the Dalai Lama, for example. How much good, how much power he does, how many thousands, millions of people he helps. And it's sort of like that. If you sort of extrapolate that, you can develop this notion, well, to really help people the best way, I should become the most powerful spiritual being I can. And the most powerful spiritual being that exists is a Buddha. A Buddha is an infinitely powerful spiritual being. And so that's what leads you. And you do that. And especially when you do these meditations on bodhicitta, you develop this real, how can I put it? It becomes intolerable to you to think of anyone suffering. You can't bear the thought of any sentient being in this world suffering. And again, the sentient being is a special Buddhist terminology. It means a being with a mind, which includes people in the animal realm. There's also higher hell and heavenly realms and stuff, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, you can just think about it as human beings. So it's this notion where it becomes intolerable for anyone to suffer. And then you develop this wish, and this wish becomes spontaneous, and it becomes overwhelming. You have this desire to become a full Buddha, because by doing so, you best help everyone else. So that's sort of the way of thinking that the Mahayana path envisaged. And it's considered to be extraordinarily powerful. Once you're really on this path, it's like you generate almost like infinite amounts of karma. And in fact, you actually need to do that. You need to develop, like I say, everything is cause and effect. So if you're going to become an infinite spiritual being, you have to develop infinite positive karma to achieve that result. And you can do that through bodhicitta. So you can ask, well, how is that possible? That seems ridiculous. How can we develop anything infinite? And I think the sort of chain of thought that comes into this is the idea of, think about benefiting one person. If you benefit one person, you help one person. But let's say you're able to benefit two people. Well, if you benefit two people, you're probably generating twice as much karma. Well, let's say you do it for three people. Okay, now you're generating three times as. You do it for 100 people, 100 times as much karma. Well, if your wish is to help all sentient beings be happy and achieve enlightenment, your goal is actually practically infinite, because you're wishing to help all sentient beings. There's almost an infinite amount of sentient beings. So that's why you generate such huge amounts of positive karma. And as I said before, karma is primarily intention, the intention of your thought. Wishing somebody to be happy generates positive karma, because it's that intention, it's that wish for people to be happy. And so if you're wishing to help everybody, you're generating, times the number of people, the amount of positive karma you do it. And so it works the same way. I mean, if you're wishing for everyone on the earth to be happy, you're actually generating a huge amount of positive karma, which is why this original, Brahma Viharas is so powerful. But bodhicitta is essentially the same thing. It's wanting to help all sentient beings. And so that's why it's so powerful. And it's extraordinarily altruistic, and that's the other positive thing of it. Because as I say, almost all of our negativity comes from our egotism. Well, see, that's tied up with this notion of this wisdom. We think that we have this permanent self that we need to make happy. And to make this permanent self happy, we create all of this negativity, whether through greed, wanting things, or through hatred, pushing things away that we don't like. And so all of our negativity comes from this egocentricity. And bodhicitta and the Mahayana Path directly attacks that egotism, because it focuses on other people. It's perfectly, purely altruistic. It's wishing, because again, your wish to achieve enlightenment is not to make yourself permanently happy, but it's to make everybody else permanently happy, which also includes yourself, because you're part of everybody. So there's a ton of egotricity, but you're just one out of billions or whatever. Okay, so and it's considered, very, very powerful. The other aspect of it is that there are two types of this bodhicitta. So in this bodhicitta, it's like everything in life, everything in Buddhism, everything in Buddhism is gradual. You have to work up to things gradually. You have to improve yourself gradually and slowly and continuously. And I think the most important thing in Buddhism is actually just to keep going, just keep practicing positivity. But anyway, in bodhicitta, there's considered to be two main branches or two main types. One is called aspiring bodhicitta, and the other is called real bodhicitta, if you like. So aspiring bodhicitta is when we're at the beginning stages, which is what all of us are at, and it's just this wish to develop bodhicitta. It's sort of, sometimes they call it artificial bodhicitta, because you generate this wish for all other sentient beings. You develop this wish to achieve enlightenment so you can help all other sentient beings. But it's a little bit artificial. You know, you're thinking this because you really want to do it. So it has this aspiration or this hope of achieving this is what's going on. And that should not be, you know, poo-pooed. That is extraordinarily powerful. Even this wish is extraordinarily powerful, generates huge amount of positive karma. However, at some point, you develop what's called real bodhicitta, which is actually a very high spiritual achievement. It's very, very deep. You have to achieve, you know, very deep meditational achievements to accomplish this. You have to have a very powerful mind. But when you achieve real bodhicitta, it just becomes part of yourself. It's like you can't stop it. You know, you have this wish, this bodhicitta wish, every single moment of your life, and you can't stop yourself from not having it. It's just so powerful. It just completely takes over your whole life. It's what they call spontaneous bodhicitta. You just can't help yourself. And so that's real bodhicitta. And when you have that real bodhicitta, then the karma you generated is truly extraordinary. But nonetheless, you know, what we all do is we practice aspiring bodhicitta. And that's all you really need to worry about. And again, there are specific meditations toward accomplishing this goal, which I'm going to get into in a minute. So anyway, okay, so that's our goal for the moment, is to achieve this bodhicitta. Okay, so the other difference between the Mahayana Path and the Hinayana Path is, in the Hinayana Path, originally you just want to achieve liberation from samsara. But what happens for a bodhisattva who wants to become a full Buddha, instead of dying and going off into nirvana, the bodhisattva at this point actually has some control over your karma and chooses to be reborn in samsara over and over again. So even though you've achieved liberation from samsara, you choose to continue to be reborn in samsara. Of course, it's not much of a problem, because if you're liberated from samsara, you don't have any mental suffering whatsoever, so you don't have any real suffering. But nonetheless, the reason why you stay in samsara is because you need to continue on as a bodhisattva, working to achieve higher and higher levels of positive karma, until finally you achieve this infinite amount that enables you to achieve full enlightenment. And then at that point, then you become, then at that point, you can go off to nirvana. But it's said in the Mahayana Path that even when you are in nirvana, you continue to help all sentient beings in our world who are in samsara. And so in Buddhism, there's not just one Buddha, there are almost infinite numbers of Buddhas, large numbers of Buddhas. And sometimes in the Mahayana tradition, these are given specific names, like Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, Tara was especially attractive, is a female Buddha that's especially attractive to women, and so forth. So all of these Buddhas are identical to Buddha Shakyamuni, because an infinite being is an infinite being. It is perfect in every way, so there can be no difference. But the difference comes because these other types of Buddha, while they were human, while they were on the Bodhisattva path, made vows to help sentient beings in specific ways. So Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, made vows to help the compassion of human beings. And Manjushri made vows to help the wisdom of human beings, and so forth. And by connecting to these Buddhas through making requests to them, engaging in various spiritual practices that involve them, usually that are called pujas. These are sort of religious ceremonies. Connect to these Buddhas, and through connecting to these Buddhas, somehow you can sort of get help from them. Somehow their energy can be transmitted to you. And one way of thinking about this, which I think applies to all Buddhas, it's said that all of these Buddhas who exist are actually trying to help every single one of us every moment of our lives. And in fact, how can they not? Because a Buddha has this goal to help all sentient beings. They can't not do it. It's part of them. And so you can say, well, if all these Buddhas are helping me, why don't they just wave their hand to cause me to be enlightened? And the reason why they can't is because it's our own minds that are the problems. And only we can change our own minds. Only we can purify our own minds. Nobody can wave a hand and cause you to become enlightened. However, what the Buddhas can do is they can provide support for us. Spiritual teachings and various, and even material things, all sorts of various positivities. And sometimes, there are times in people's lives when suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, things seem to be going right. And that often is said to be the blessing of a Buddha. So again, you can say, well, how come we're not perfect beings then if we have all these Buddhas helping us? After all, a Buddha is a perfect being. And there's one picture which I've always found very helpful. It's a very interesting picture. It says, imagine that you have some house, and this house has windows and doors, and the sun is shining down on the house. So you can think of the sun's rays as being the blessings of the Buddha. And whenever it hits you, you receive a blessing. And we are people who are living in the house. And so the way this analogy goes is that if we close all the doors and shutters, it will be completely dark inside. We will block all of these blessings from the Buddhas, and therefore we will get no benefit from them. And so in a certain sense, one way of looking at the spiritual life is opening all the doors and windows so that we allow these blessings to penetrate to us. And so that's one view of the spiritual life, is a sort of openness to the spiritual life. That if you are open to the spiritual life, and so this goes along with this effort to lead a spiritual life. If you are leading some kind of effort to improve your spiritual life, then you are absorbing these blessings. And as I say, my own experience and the experience of many others, it's amazing how a lot of times just the spiritual help that we need often just appears out of nowhere. And I think it's not random. It's because we're making an effort. By making an effort, we're making the causes for this to happen. We're producing the causes to absorb these blessings. So again, that's another very interesting way of thinking about the spiritual path. Again, all of you, I'm saying this, you may or may not believe me, which is perfectly fine. Again, you have to lead the spiritual life to experience these things for yourself and to see if you really believe it. But anyway, it's a very beautiful picture. So going on, so again, okay, so let's talk more about bodhicitta then. So again, bodhicitta is a spiritual attainment, and it's not going to happen just randomly. Bodhicitta is not going to fall out of the sky and hit you on the head, and then you're bodhicitta. Again, like everything else, you have to create the causes and conditions to achieve bodhicitta, which means you have to do different spiritual practices. And the way it is, like most of Buddhism is really about learning to think about the world in a different way and practicing thinking about the world in a different way so it becomes habitual, a way that is very positive and life-enhancing. So there's two main paths to achieve bodhicitta in the Mahayana tradition. And each of them was developed by very highly realized Buddha-like beings. The simpler one, or the more detailed one, which is the one that most people follow, is called the sevenfold cause and effect. And in the sevenfold cause and effect, there's essentially 7 steps that you develop. So again, so let me just go through it. As I go through it, you'll sort of see the logic of why it works. And one step helps the next step. So it's like a progression. So it's like you're developing this driving force forward to achieve bodhicitta. And each step will sort of drive the next one. The first step is called developing equanimity. This word equanimity has different technical meanings and different areas of Buddhism. But in this area, what it means is feeling the same about all beings. So not hating anybody or not loving anyone, but treating all people the same. Because our goal is to love all sentient beings the same way equally. And so the first thing is just learning how to feel the same way about them. Just to realize that the reason we like people or don't like people is often, they use this word adventitious, which means accidental. It's just history, it's like maybe somebody's nice to you, so you like them, or maybe somebody is nasty to you, so you hate them. But, a lot of it is just the randomness of life. Maybe somebody's nasty to you because they just had a bad day and it has nothing to do with you. Maybe the two of you have karma from previous lives that continue on in this life. So there can be lots of reasons. But once you realize that liking somebody or not liking somebody, there's nothing intrinsic about that person that is likable or non-likable. We're all the same. And this also comes to this notion of Buddhism, where we really focus on the sameness of all people. We say all people are the same. Everybody looks different. They may have different heights. They may be male, female, whatever, but everybody wants to be happy and no one wants to suffer. No one wants to suffer. So in that regard, we are all the same. So in that sense, we are all equal. And so we do various meditations to help us develop that equanimity. The next one is the weirdest one of the whole group. It's called recognizing that all living beings are our mothers. And this is, if you like, a trick. It's true, but it's a trick. So the logic goes, if we've all had infinite previous lives, which the Buddha said we had, the Buddha always said he couldn't see any beginning to any of our lives. So if we've had all these infinite lives, then at some point, every other sentient being at one point must have been our mother. And the reason for thinking about this is because if we have a good mother, there's no more perfect model of pure love. And people that have good mothers love their mothers with a type of love which is just amazing. So you start trying to develop this recognition, doing meditations, how all living beings should have been our mother. And then you remember the kindness of these good mothers. And if you've had a good mother in this life, just think she's probably been your mother countless times. One of these countless times before, she was probably a good mother. So think about that time. Because sometimes people do have mothers they don't like. But anyway, think about, a really good mother is so kind, and anyone who's kind to you, you want to repay that kindness. So that's the next step, developing the wish to repay the kindness of all mother beings. And so that's why you get this phrase, mother beings. It's this recognition that all beings at some point must have been our mother. And, and let's say your mother may be alive or dead. It doesn't matter. But no matter if you've had a good, loving mother, even if your mother died 20 years ago, you still have this tremendous love for her. The love for your mother never diminishes, no matter how long ago your mother lived. And so if it doesn't matter how long your present mother lived, what if your mother lived 1 billion lifetimes ago? Still, she was wonderful to you. You need to repay her kindness. So if you think that way, then you see how this logic naturally brings you to this conclusion of wanting to love everyone. So the next step is when you have this wish to repay the kindness of your previous mothers, which means repay the kindness of everyone, actually, then you develop affectionate love, because that's, when people are kind to us, we love them. And it's just an affectionate love. If somebody's nice to you in the store, you have this sort of affection toward them. And so the goal at this stage is to develop affectionate love for every single sentient being without exception. Because every single sentient being without exception at one point was a good mother and gave us extraordinarily kindness. And we need to repay that. And then the next step is that if you have this kind of affectionate love for people who you love deeply, you can't bear to see them suffer. And so you develop what's known as great compassion. The greatness means everyone without exception, not compassion for one person, but great compassion for all sentient beings. Because, if you have a loving mother, there's no way that you could bear to see your loving mother suffer. And if all sentient beings at one point have been our loving mothers, we can't bear to see even a single sentient being of any of these suffer. And so once you have great compassion, then the next step is what's called superior intention. And this is really what turns on this is where the rubber meets the road, as they so to speak. So what the superior intention means is since you can't bear this suffering, you have to do something about it. That's what superior intention is. You are determined to do something to remove that suffering. It's sort of like if you're a parent and your kid is drowning in the ocean, you have no choice. You have to rush out in the ocean to try to save them. And that's sort of what superior intention is like. It's like, you can't bear to see these other sentient beings suffer, so you have to do something about it. So that's when you start to develop this real bodhicitta. You can't help yourself. You've got to help remove the suffering. And that's the final step where you develop bodhicitta. So you can sort of see the logic of it. And each of these has meditations that you specifically use to go along to develop these things and to deepen these realizations, because each of these steps are true. They may seem a little bit far-fetched with some other things, but when you meditate enough on them, you develop the conviction of the truth of these things for yourself. And you have to develop the conviction for yourself. You have to do the actual practice. But if you follow each of these steps, you're guaranteed to develop bodhicitta. You can't help yourself. And from the logic of it, you can see how it's impossible not to achieve bodhicitta if you can successfully engage in each of these steps. Now, the second path of bodhicitta is a faster one, and it's done for people who maybe have developed bodhicitta in previous lives. Maybe they're just, they're more spiritually developed. In a way, it's much deeper and it's much more powerful, but not everyone can do it. So most people follow this sevenfold cause and effect. But the other path, which was developed, is called exchanging self with others. And this way of exchanging self with others has only a few steps. So the first step is to develop this real recognition how we are all the same, how every single one of us want happiness, how every single one of us don't want to suffer. And so once you start developing this, then if you really meditate on this a lot, you realize you have to develop altruism. Because, for example, why should my happiness cause you suffering? Why am I a better person than you? Because we're all the same. There's no reason why I should be greedy and steal your money so I can be happy if it causes you grief, because you're equally as deserving as happiness as I am. So once you see that we're all the same this way, then you automatically develop this sort of altruism. You can't wish to harm anyone else because there's no reason. There's no logical reason why, I should be happy and you shouldn't be happy. We all should be happy. So that's the first step, this happiness and avoiding suffering. And then the second one is called contemplating the advantages of self-cherishing and the advantages of cherishing, the disadvantages of self-cherishing and the advantages of cherishing others. So this notion of cherishing is wishing people to be happy. So in this Mahayana path, in this Bodhicitta path, our normal tendency is self-cherishing, wishing ourselves to be happy. So, if there's a line to get fabulous cake, we always try to get first in line. It's like it's this egotism again. We always want the best things for ourselves. And we're always, everything is evaluated in terms of self-cherishing. How can I cherish myself more and more? So it's sort of like egotism. And what we need to do is realize that the end result of that is to cause us to engage in negative karma and actually create our suffering. So when you really look at this self-cherishing attitude, this egotism, what you quickly discover is it only leads to negative states of mind. It only leads to unhappiness, to this to a disturbed mind, which is an unhappy mind. So when you really focus, when you really carefully look at self-cherishing or egotism, nothing good ever comes out of it. And so you have to convince yourself of that. And on the other hand, when you look at cherishing others, all sorts of wonderful things happen. If you focus on cherishing others, there's no way that you will commit any negative karma. You will create bundles of good karma. So, this cherishing others is simple. This other practice I said, just you wish people to be happy, other people to be happy. You wish for them not to suffer. That is cherishing others in a nutshell. So when you develop that practice and when you see how many, I think for me personally, like if you just do this little practice of going up to somebody and wishing them to be happy, you just find that you become happy. And once you realize that and you practice these sorts of things more and more, over and over again, ironically enough, you discover that self-cherishing is the way to make yourself happiest of all. And okay, so that's that step. So once you really develop that, then you focus on a practice called exchanging self with others. And so the name of this, exchanging self with others, seems very, very weird because, it seems like I want to trade minds or bodies or something with somebody else, but that's not what it's about at all. What it's about is really this notion of self-cherishing versus cherishing others. So exchanging self with others means that normally we cherish ourselves. That's our normal attitude throughout life. It just comes to us naturally. We always do that. We almost can't help ourselves. So exchanging self with others means stop doing that and focus on cherishing others. So in a sense, so instead of cherishing the self that's right here, we flip it out, we cherish the others. So exchanging self with others is this practice of always focusing on cherishing others and stopping cherishing ourselves. And the irony of the whole thing is that when you do that, in effect, you will be cherishing yourself because you'll become the happiest you could ever be. So it's one of the grandest ironies in all of Buddhism, that the way to make yourself happy is to try to make other people happy. So anyway, that's and once you've done that, then you develop bodhicitta, because that leads you then to this wish to become a full Buddha so you can most perfectly cherish all other sentient beings. So anyway, that's the way that bodhicitta works. There are other practices of bodhicitta. They're called to be what are called the 6 perfections. So these are more details of ways that, you just can't run around saying, I wish other people to be happy. You need more specific practices. And these 6 perfections are the sort of more details of where you can practice it in a more detailed way. And these 6 perfections are generosity, morality, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. So the practice of generosity means you develop this wish to give people things, to be generous to people. And that generosity can take different forms. It can take a material form. You can give to charities. It can take a spiritual form, giving dharma, either teaching like I am, or even just talking dharma with your friends is a way of giving dharma. Giving fearlessness, protecting people who are in harm's way, even little insects. Insects are believed to have a mind. So if you actually protect a little insect from being harmed in some way, that's giving fearlessness. And of course, giving love. Giving love to other people is also a form of giving. Morality means practicing non-harming. If your whole goal is to make all of the sentient beings, how could you possibly want to harm them? So the practice of morality is the essence of bodhicitta. And if you have true bodhicitta, you can't stop yourself. You have to be moral. You have to wish not to harm, and you must have this wish to benefit people. Patience means, can take different forms. It can take two general forms. There's a whole teaching on patience. It's a very, very important spiritual practice. The first is the obvious one, not retaliating in anger in any way, or getting angry or retaliating with people. And again, the reason for this is some people have trouble with anger, but the way to think of anger is the wish to harm someone mentally. So in your mind, if you're angry at someone, you're basically wishing to harm them. And as a bodhisattva, you can't wish to harm anyone. So Buddhists work very hard not to develop anger because we love all sentient beings. That doesn't mean that we're pushovers, because we also, if other beings are doing negative things, they themselves are creating negative karma for themselves, and we don't wish them to suffer, so we want to stop them from creating that negative karma because we don't wish them to be harmed. But in Buddhism, it's really important. It's important to have this love for all sentient beings and to always have this wish to help them in some way. It may not be obvious how to help them. And like I say, in Buddhism, it's not about formal help. It's not doing things that look like they help, but it's genuinely helping. So sometimes Buddhists do things that look like they're harming, but if the intention is really to help, then it's the intention that matters. So sometimes we have to do crazy things to help people, but the goal is always to have that intention. I wish to help them. I wish them to be happy. I wish them not to suffer. And I will do whatever it takes to do that, to accomplish that goal. And the other form of patience is this patience for the willingness to endure difficulties on the spiritual path. Because everyone on their spiritual path sometimes gets tired or worn out, and you need patience to endure continuing to do the practice, even when it sometimes is difficult. So that's the other form of patience that's very valuable. And then joyous effort means, sometimes it's called delighting in virtue. It's very important in our spiritual path that our spiritual path be happy, that we be really happy to study Dharma, that we be happy to practice the spiritual path. In meditation, it actually develops on its own. People that do deep meditations develop, there's deep joys in meditation. So if you're a really good meditator, that will come automatically to you. But even, it's important that we have this sort of joy in our spiritual practice, because that's what keeps our motivation going. And if you're practicing correctly, actually, that joyousness will naturally come to you. And so you don't really have to worry about it. But joyous effort, trying to improve our spiritual practice is important. Concentration is, again, meditation. And wisdom is developing this notion of emptiness, which I have to come to very soon. And all of these, why they are called perfections, is that each of these 6 activities is done with a bodhicitta motivation. So each of these 6 activities, they're called perfections because we are engaging in each of these practices with the intention of becoming a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, there's one other practice that I will just briefly mention as another Mahayana. It's one of the most powerful Mahayana practices. It's called Lujong, or sometimes Tonglen. Sometimes it's called training the mind. I always talk about it as taking and giving. So this practice in a nutshell, and I've done this practice, I find this practice most helpful when you're in the deepest difficulties in your life. So the way this practice works is whatever difficulty you're in, instead of focusing on yourself, you think about all the other people who have the same difficulty. And you think about how terrible it is and how many other people even have the same difficulty you have in even a worse way. And you develop this wish to take on their pain and suffering upon yourself so that it relieves them. And this is a mental practice. So for example, let's say you have cancer. So if you have cancer and you're suffering pain, you think of all the other people who have cancer, who maybe have worse pain than you have. and you mentally wish that you could take on all of their suffering upon yourself so that they would be happy. And in that mental wish, you visualize it as dark smoke coming down to the top of your head, into your heart, and destroying all of your self-cherishing. So that's the taking. And then the giving is you develop this wish to give all of these living beings perfect happiness, all of your happiness, so that they will be happy. And again, it's a mental exercise. So of course, you're not going to really take on their suffering. You don't have to worry. You'll never feel any of their pain. But it's such a powerful wish that it generates enormous spiritual karma. And I've done this at various times. I mean, my youngest daughter was skiing in the Santa Fe ski area, got lost in the mountain overnight. Most people die when they achieve that. I was worried that she was going to die. Turned out that she was very resourceful. She dug a snow cave, survived the night because of digging a snow cave, and actually in her ski boots walked off the mountain and got help herself. But at the time, I was really worried because many people die of exposure. And it was in the middle of a blizzard that this happened, which is why she got lost in the first place. But in the middle of that, I just thought of all the other mothers, all the other parents who have had children who have died. And I wished to take on their suffering and give them, and that's what I focused on. And through doing that, I was able to fall asleep. And it changed my whole way of looking at this. And the reason it changes it, because it takes away this egocentric. So instead of focusing, oh, poor me, my child may die, instead of focusing on selfishness, your own selfishness, you're focusing on others. And it completely changes your whole attitude toward the thing. And it just makes everything easier to endure. It makes everything, it just changes the world. I also once did this in a hospital when I had a serious ailment and came close to dying. And again, I did the same practice. And it changed my whole spiritual practice in the hospital. It just changed the whole way I looked at it. I could be very calm and peaceful. I had a calm mind. And that's what this practice does. It's so powerful. And when it was originally first developed by a series of monks, they were actually using it to cure leprosy. Lepers who were practicing this practice were actually curing their own leprosy through this practice. It's an enormously powerful spiritual practice, one of the most powerful Mahayana practices I know. And again, it's pure altruism, which is why I think it's so effective. It generates such amazing amounts of positive karma. Anyway, there are whole classes on this. Sometimes you can take 6-week courses on just this one practice. And then there's many other wonderful aspects of this practice. But so that's another thing. So now I should very quickly get into emptiness, the wisdom. So this is the way we actually achieve liberation from samsara. So you have to ask yourself, how could wisdom actually do anything useful? And the way it works is it's tied up again with this notion of ego, selflessness, which is the way the Buddha. So you can talk about emptiness in various different ways. And as Geshe Sherab always says, there's many different levels of this wisdom. So I'm just going to give you the most superficial, what they sometimes call the coarsest idea of it, and people spend decades trying to probe deeper. In fact, the guy who established the Gelug tradition, Lama Tsongkhapa, around 1400, he went on enormous retreats, doing amazing spiritual things, trying to achieve a realization of emptiness. So the full realization is very powerful and deep. However, I think it's not that difficult to get a crude idea for how it works. And the basic idea for how it works is that there is no self. So what do we mean by that? That's sort of a weird thing, because we say, well, I'm me, you're you. Of course, there's obviously a self. But what that means is that there's no permanent core to you that makes you who you are. So there's nothing stamped on I don't know, a soul or something like that inside of me that says Bob. You know, who I am right now is just the result of my history. All of the causes and conditions, all of my past karma, all of the things that have happened to me, all of those causes and conditions have produced the me that I'm me right now. The type of thoughts I have, the types of emotions I have. As I go through different experiences in life, I will change. My appearance has certainly changed. When we're a baby, we're small, we think in a certain way. When we're a teenager, we think in a radically different way. We have a different body. As a young adult, an older adult, as an older, we're constantly changing. And that's the idea of no self. There's no permanent core. It's like there's nothing permanent about any aspect of ourselves. We may be a loving person now, but we can become a hating person. We may be a person with a lot of hatred now, we can become a loving person. It all depends on the causes and conditions that we create to change our life. And so it's that way with everything. You can think of, take a bar of steel. A bar of steel feels like it's intrinsically this really, it's so solid, it's so right there, it's strong. We think of it as this really permanent thing. However, that bar of steel had causes and conditions that produced it. And in fact, there are causes and conditions that are making that bar of steel have the properties it has right now. Because right now it seems really steel, it's very, very strong. But if I take that piece of steel and go to a steel mill and put it in a really intense oven that heats it to extraordinarily high temperatures, it will melt. In fact, we know that because that's how you make steel. You do various melting processes. And when it melts, it doesn't seem solid at all. It seems liquid. And it's like that with everything. Everything changes, and everything is the way it is, depending on the causes and conditions that brought it into this present moment. And why is that important? That seems very abstract, very unimportant. The reason that's important is, for example, think about somebody who's your enemy. When we think of somebody who's our enemy, we think of this person as being intrinsically our enemy. This person is just naturally our enemy. This person is just naturally a nasty being. But that's not true at all. There were causes and conditions that brought that person into that state of being. And if that person's experiences in life changes, that person can change a lot and become a very loving person. And in fact, there's many examples that people have where they first meet someone, they instantly dislike them, they think they're terrible. And then later in life, they get to know them better and they actually become very close friends. And it's sort of that way with everything. There's nothing permanent in life. So I think the easiest way of thinking about emptiness is first thinking of impermanence. If you think that everything changes, everything in our world is constantly changing, there's nothing permanent. And once you deeply realize that, you realize that there's no permanent self or intrinsic nature, either to ourself or to anything in nature. And that's basically what emptiness is about. That's the way the world really is. And the reason, how does that affect our lives and negative karma? Well, the way it affects our lives and negative karma is because we say, if only I get $1 million, I'll be permanently happy. Or only if I get this amazing partner that's, beautiful, handsome, whatever, that will transform my life. And from then on, my life will be permanently happy. Well, once you realize that there's nothing permanent anywhere, you can never be permanent happiness. Because what we really think is we have this permanent self inside ourselves. And if we just give it the right things, it will become permanently happy. Enough money, enough, health, all these other things. And because of that notion, we do all of these negative actions. We steal money, we do things that make us feel more powerful, that make us feel that we want people to like us. We do things that we think. So we do all of the negativities because of the sense of ourself. Somehow we're trying to enhance ourselves. It's a self-cherishing. And so it's a very subtle thing to realize. But once you realize there's no self that you can make permanently happy, in this world. In this world in which we live, which is samsara, there is no samsaric pleasure or situation that is permanent. So we can never be permanently happy in samsara. So it's ridiculous to think that doing all of this negativity is going to make us perfectly happy. The only perfect happiness is the spiritual happiness. And again, you have to experience the spiritual happiness for yourself to see how satisfying it is. Spiritual happiness is completely satisfying. It's true happiness, because, it's like, if, for example, if you eat a delicious meal, you take one bite and it's wonderful. And then you take another bite and you want more. And then you take another bite and you want more. And you never have enough. You always want more. The ancient Romans used to go off and induce vomiting so their stomach, empty their stomach so they could eat. But it doesn't matter, no matter how much you eat, you always want more. And that's the way the samsaric pleasures of this world are. We always want more. It's never completely satisfying. And again, you can test this out for yourself. You can look at your own experience. Whereas if you do these types of meditations, you can achieve these amazing, these really deep spiritual forms of happiness, which are very peaceful and very, but again, I can only say this, you have to experience it for yourself. But anyway, that's sort of why emptiness works. Go ahead, Tricia.
Yes. So I don't know that, so I'm new to learning about Buddhism, practicing Buddhism. And for me, from what I've read with emptiness, nothingness, and then how it's supposed to liberate you from suffering once you are able to understand that. And I don't know if it's because I still struggle with the attachment to nothingness, the definition of emptiness. And so for me, it's like overwhelming sometimes to be like, well, that doesn't make me feel like I can end suffering, when I just feel like it's so, like the word itself has that connotation of emptiness, nothing, just void, like no purpose. And so I don't know, that's like a normal thing for people who just start learning about Buddhism to have that kind of like struggle with, well, this says I'm supposed to, like, once I realize that, then I can, release suffering. And I'm like, how? Because that makes me more anxious.
Okay.
So
yes.
if you,
No. What you're experiencing is perfectly normal. In fact, most people feel that way. And in fact, most people feel scared by emptiness because they sort of feel it means like non-existence, like there's nothing there. And it's like, why would I want to become nothing or extinct or something like that? And that is the wrong notion of emptiness. But the word emptiness actually maybe is an unfortunate translation. The Sanskrit word is shunyata. But, I think maybe the better way of looking at it is emptiness doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It just means that everything changes. So it's like there's no permanent core or no permanent self to things, is maybe the way to look at it. That things are constantly changing, and because things are constantly changing, and that's in this world of samsara. So in this world of samsara, things constantly change. So there is no eternal happiness in samsara, because no matter how good things are, they'll get worse, they'll get better, they'll change. So it's only when you escape from samsara that you can, when you achieve nirvana, so that's what nirvana is, it's only when you achieve the state of nirvana that you actually achieve perfect happiness. And part of the way that works is there is some deeper things which are very hard to understand. But Buddha sort of implied that the reason why we're stuck in samsara is precisely because of our attachment to samsara. We see some of the pleasures in samsara and we say, oh my God, I can't give that up. That is so wonderful. I've got to have that, and there are these things, But again, the Buddha explains that these pleasures are they're always unsatisfactory because we can't hold on to them. If you have a new car, it quickly becomes old. And even, it's like when people are first married or in total bliss, but then they become ordinary law. It's like that with everything. You can't, it's like once you have that first taste of the most delicious food, that's the most perfect time of all. After that, it's never as good ever again, because we get used to everything, and it's sort of that notion that, it's, and that's what actually, when we talk about suffering in Buddhism, it really is dukkha, is the Sanskrit word. It really means unsatisfactory. So it means that there's nothing satisfactory in samsara because we can't hang on to it. It's not permanent. If we could get that perfect, pleasurable bite of food and it would stay with us forever, then we would have perfect happiness. Then it would be satisfactory. But it's always painful when we lose that. We always want it back again. We want that perfect taste again, over and over again. But we can't get it. And it's like that with everything. We can't hold on to anything in samsara. And if you like emptiness, it's just this realization that that's the way the world is. There's nothing solid about samsara that you can hold on to. It's just constantly changing. And
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot. Thank you, because for me, I thought it was like a stage of first you accept your nothing and emptiness, and then you can move on. And I'm like, I don't know how the continuation, like we continue to, nothing's the same. We continue in different ways. I think like Thich Nhat Hanh used the example of the cloud, then it turns to rain, then it, it continues on. It doesn't, it's not permanent. Right. So thank you for explaining that, because I'm thinking, I have to accept this first, but I don't know how to deal with that word exactly in the understanding of continuation. Okay.
Yeah, that word has a lot of connotations in English that get in people's way.
Yes.
But when they talk about things being very nebulous and stuff and not being solid, it's just that notion of change. It's that you can't hang on to anything. So it's very nebulous because you've got it today and it's gone tomorrow or in the next moment. So thank you for bringing that up. A lot of people have that confusion. And again, when I only have, 15 minutes to explain all of emptiness, it's very hard. So I'm bound to create all sorts of problems. But anyway, the other thing about emptiness or the Buddha actually talked about selflessness. And maybe for beginners, it's actually easier. There's no permanent core to ourselves that we just constantly change, is this notion of selflessness. But okay, yeah. So maybe I should just leave it at this, because it's a very deep and difficult thing to learn. And I think what we do is a bunch of us start with sort of a crude understanding of it, and then through years, decades, or whole life, we actually deepen this understanding. Aaron, you had a question. You have your hand up.
I was just going to say, the way I like to think about it is that it's basically saying nothing has an essence of its own. Like nothing exists through itself.
Exactly.
So it's not just that like things are impermanent, but there's nothing that makes a cloud per se. That's something we impute to it. It's something we bring to the table. Like we can look at it a different viewpoint, and it's not a cloud per se.
Yes, that's right. So and that's a notion of the influence in our mind and how we look at the world, because we like to clump things together. We like to look at an object and think of it as being a single object. But really, all of these objects that we think of as single objects, think of car. A car has a steering wheel, it's got tires, it's got all these different things. But we think about it as a single entity. And then we think that single entity is somehow permanent in some way, that it somehow exists all by itself. But in reality, it doesn't. It's like I say, like you take the steel bar, it looks like it's just existing there by itself. It's just a single thing, and it just exists there. But in reality, there are causes and conditions that support it that way. And like I say, if you put it in a different context, like a high temperature oven, it'll be completely different. It won't keep that same intrinsic nature that we thought that it had. But we always have this tendency to, as Aaron said, impute an intrinsic essence or property to it. And that's because we don't see all of the different causes and conditions that are supporting the way it is. Another way of thinking about it that I think is helpful is in terms of isolation. If something existed all by itself, all on its own, it would have to be isolated from the rest of the universe. Because in reality, everything is connected to all the other aspects of the universe. And by being connected to the other aspects of the universe, what we really mean by that is that it interacts with the rest of the universe. It's influenced by the rest of the universe. It influences other things in the universe. You know, you hit the iron bar, you hit somebody with it, it's influencing that person. Or you put it, you know, like in an oven, it's influenced by, so everything actually changes because it's connected to the rest of the universe. And since nothing exists in isolation, nothing has that property of existing all on its own in some kind of isolated, separate way of having some kind of intrinsic essence. Everything has the properties it does through the interactions it has with the rest of the universe. So that's another way of thinking about it. So I think of it that way because I'm a physicist.
No, I mean, I know you said that's a topic that can be a whole series of classes, but out of the weeks of me learning, that's the one part I just couldn't connect and I struggle with. And just from this explanation, I mean, it makes so much more sense to me. And so thank you, you and Aaron, for helping, connect the dots. And I think I was just so hung up again on the connotation of the word that couldn't understand how it related to the whole picture of what the message was.
Yeah. No, the word emptiness throws a lot of people off. So
yeah, because that's I'm always like, I'm different than I was 3 months ago, and how do I remain empty and nothing for right now and then later? And so
another way of thinking of the emptiness is that you're empty of the person you were 3 months ago,
right?
Because you've changed.
Yes.
and so in emptiness, it actually helps to think about it in multiple ways, and because it's a very complex thing, and in Buddhism. And the Buddha himself always talked about it as being the most complicated idea in all of Buddhism. So, okay. So let me ask you, I'm sort of running over my time. Do people want to hear just briefly about the Vajrayana path, the Tantric path? Or do you think you do? Okay. So I will give it very briefly, and I'll run over a little bit just so I can do it. But it's important to stop for these questions. I mean, these questions are actually more important. So the Tantric thing is a little bit esoteric. It's a Mahayana practice. And as a practice, it's a way of thinking, a way of practicing. It's called the quick path to enlightenment. To engage in Tantric or Vajrayana practice, the two are synonymous. They're just two different terms for the same thing. In Buddhism, it has to do with, it's called the quick path to enlightenment. And to accomplish this, you actually have to have Tantric empowerment. So you have to go somewhere and go through this special religious ceremony by a special master who gives you this Tantric empowerment. You can read all of the different Tantric practices in various books. Everything is published now. But what the masters say, that what the great Buddhists say, they say that you can read the practices, you can engage in them, but if you don't have this Tantric empowerment, they won't be powerful. They won't have any real effect. So they won't do anything. So they'll be sort of fruitless. So if you want to do real Tantric empowerment, real Tantra, you really need an empowerment. Now, there's different levels of Tantra. There's 4 major levels of, or I should say, there's 4 different types of Tantra. So these 4 different types of Tantra are, where do I have it written down here? The lowest one is Action Tantra. Oh, wait a second. It's because I'm on the wrong page. That's why I don't have it here in front. That's why I can't find it. Okay. So so there's action, performance, yoga, and highest yoga tantra. So the only ones that I've ever seen anybody use is the lowest one, action tantra, and the highest one, highest yoga tantra. And action tantras are often given to almost anybody, and it's very easy to get these empowerments. And these involve things like action tantras of Avalokiteshvara, of Manjushri, of a lot of these sort of normal tantric, normal Buddhas that we hear about. The highest yoga tantra usually involves what's known as a yidam, which is a Buddha, but is a special tantric Buddha. So again, it's a Buddha that is connected to a special tantric practice. And there's different types of yidams, and you can do different types of a Vajrayana or a tantric practice, depending on which one you connect to, which one you have the empowerment for. Typical ones are Vajrayogini and Haruka are common ones that you hear about. But there are also other ones as well. And there's different types, but it really doesn't matter. Most of the highest yoga tantrics sort of involve sort of similar things. Tantric Buddhism is said to require strong faith. And the reason why it requires confidence in the practice, and the reason why is because it deals with a lot of things that aren't normal. You're dealing with sort of very deep spiritual practices that often seem very weird. And you've got to have faith that they're going to work. And of course, the way it works is you launch yourself into them, and then you practice them, and you see their effect, and then that gives you confidence, so then you practice them some more. And the action tantra really, so there are actually two main levels of most tantric Buddhism. The lowest level is called generation stage. So I'm talking now about highest yoga tantra, and I'll talk about the other in a second. So in highest yoga tantra, they always talk about the two stages that you accomplish. The lower stage is called generation stage, and the higher stage is called completion stage. So the generation stage involves imagining yourself as your yidam, as your tantric Buddha. And so what this involves a lot of deep meditation, where you actually try to imagine yourself being that actual Buddha. So if it's Vajrayogini, you try to really imagine yourself as being Vajrayogini. Or if you're Haruka, you try to imagine Haruka's a male, Vajrayogini is a female tantric deity. But it's said that for some, there was one amazing, I think, Tibetan practitioner who imagined himself as Haruka, and he actually thought he had horns on his head and stuff like that. Now, all of these Buddhas have elaborate outfits, sometimes multiple heads and things like this. These are all symbolic. Each of these aspects of what they wear and what they look like has spiritual symbolism, whatever it is. But they often look very weird and so forth. But anyway, you imagine. And so the idea behind this is, and here we come to emptiness again. You can think of yourself, since you have no permanent self, you're empty of any sort of self who you think you are. So if you imagine yourself to be one of these Buddhas, and if you start talking like that Buddha, talking spiritually, thinking like that Buddha, having altruism, bodhichitta, whatever, so if you act in every way exactly as that Buddha would act, are you not that Buddha? Are you not a perfect spiritual being? So that's the notion of emptiness. So that's how you apply emptiness. So in tantric practice, it's said that highest yoga tantra is the union of great bliss and emptiness. And that emptiness comes from realizing we aren't any fixed character. We can be anything. And in particular, we can be an infinite being, a Buddha. All we have to do is be that person. So that's how the notion of, that's an application of emptiness. So it's interesting that it comes up. So, and so this is part of why it's a quick path to enlightenment. Because if you can get yourself to act, so if you're a Buddha, you're acting in a perfect moral way all the time. You're constantly cherishing others. You're doing, if you're acting like this perfect Buddha, you're generating enormous amounts of positive karma. And so you will quickly become enlightened. So that's the first half. And that is also what's involved in action tantra. So in the level of action tantra, that's involved with this generation stage. And most action tantras, which are easily given to large numbers of people all the time, you imagine yourself, for example, to be Avalokiteshvara. And often when you do various religious ceremonies called pujas, if you do a puja, which is a Sanskrit term again, you can do a puja in a normal way, where you're just doing the normal spiritual practices of that puja, or you can be doing it as a form of action Tantra Buddhism. So if you have an empowerment for that type of Buddha, for that puja, you can be imagining yourself, generating yourself, imagining yourself to be that Buddha while you're doing that ceremony. And then it has a tantric aspect to it, which is sort of interesting, which I think most people don't know. So anyway, so that's the generation. The completion stage is much harder to describe. This involves things like, there is this notion that we have a spiritual body, and in addition to our physical body, we have the spiritual body. And the spiritual body has chakras, inner channels, all sorts of drops, and all sorts of very deep things. And so this is where you really need faith, because it's a lot of weird things. Hinduism also has this same notion of these chakras and inner channels and all of these things. So winds, channels, drops, it's called the subtle body, and you have a subtle mind. And you do very deep meditations on these things. And these meditations are extraordinarily powerful. You go very deep into your mind. And in fact, there can be some, if you're doing these on your own, it can be a little bit scary, because some people, you can sort of disturb your inner psyche. So sometimes so when you start, if you're really going deep into especially completion stage, it's very helpful to have a physical teacher who can guide you, so that when you run into things, he can help you through obstacles and stuff. And a lot of times people, in all of Buddhism, people always feel that they achieve attainments that they haven't achieved. They get a whiff of a little bit of pleasure and they say, oh, I must be enlightened now. And it's especially true of all of this completion stage, because many of these things are very deep, amazing, pleasurable states. Lama Yeshe, who's one of the guys that started our FPMT, our centers, he's dead now. He used to say, wow, if people only knew about this stuff, it's so blissful, they wouldn't want to do anything else. But so with this tantric practice, you can really go deep inside the cores of your mind and achieve enormous amounts of bliss. And in fact, it's said that there's different levels of mind. There's a coarse mind, which is the ordinary mind we have now. There's a more subtle mind, which is a sort of mind we have when we're sleeping. And there's a very subtle mind, which usually does not appear during ordinary life. It usually appears just at the moment of death, but it goes past us so fast, most people don't see it. And part of the purpose of this completion stage practice is that you can actually sort of cause this very subtle mind to appear in meditation. And you can sort of learn how to recognize it, how to handle it. And this very subtle mind is a completely pure mind. It has no negativity at all. That's extraordinarily powerful. And the goal is often to, when you die, having done this tantric practice of completion stage, you get used to dealing with these things. And then when you die and it appears, you can actually access that mind, use it to meditate on emptiness, and achieve liberation or enlightenment at the moment of death. So that's why this completion stage is very, very powerful. And so it's a very complex thing. It's got very complex terminology and so forth. But that sort of gives you just sort of a rough idea. And again, it's called this union of great bliss and emptiness, because the emptiness is this thing of we lose our ordinary self and we try to become this perfect being. So this is sort of the best exchanging self with others, if you like. And the only way you can do that is through emptiness, that we're not intrinsically who we are now. We can actually exchange ourselves with a perfect being and become that perfect being. And that's why you can so quickly achieve enlightenment by developing the states, But again, it's a progression, and this thing only works if you have a bodhicitta motivation. Tantric doesn't work if it's a selfish motivation. It only works if you have so it has to be a Mahayana path. So I think those are sort of the main points, Again, these things are very subtle and complex. And as I say, it takes a lot of faith because you're dealing with a lot of strange things, channels, winds, drops. But, most of these things are like all of Buddhism. You meditate, you first do it in imagination. You imagine these channels and drops and so forth. And so your meditation is actually sort of mainly initially imagination, but eventually that imagination turns real, is sort of a way of thinking about it. It's very, very hard to describe. You have to experience it yourself. But again, it's extraordinarily powerful. And it brings you, it's a way of achieving huge amounts of positive karma very quickly and accelerating your whole spiritual path. Okay, so maybe I should stop here. I've overrun. I'm going to run into the next teaching, whatever somebody starts in the next point. So I should stop here. Let me just ask whether there's any questions. Okay, I've sort of blown you all away. Yeah, I'm sorry. These courses go by. I have so little time. I used to have an extra 4 hours and I could spread things out. They go by so fast, I have to sort of dump on you. But if you get overwhelmed, you can listen. You can go on YouTube and listen again, and maybe you'll hear more the second time. So I apologize for the rapidity of it, but I don't know any other way to get through all the material. So anyway, so I hope it's been fun for you, because that's the whole purpose of these things, is to be fun and to enjoy it, and to, and again, my hope is just to sort of give you just a hint of how things work, so that when you go into other classes, you sort of have a feeling, oh, why am I doing this? Oh, well, I can sort of see how it fits in the bigger picture. And so my whole purpose of this is actually to make it easier for you to go into other classes. And so it may be wishful thinking, but at least that's always my goal. So thank you for having
so
the
much.
patience.
Thank you for the
you.
space
Thanks, Bob.
and the learning. This was awesome.
Thank you, Bob, for your generosity in time and teaching us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I hope to see you again some other class, whatever. Thank you.
So
Thank
do
you.
I.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.